We're going to look at the cardiac cycle, the events occurring during the EKG, the electrical activity recorded by the EKG, and then we're also going to look at the pressure volume curves. So we've got our EKG right here, and so we have our P wave, Q, R, S, and T wave. We're going to consider a pressure of 120 and look at the events occurring during that pressure. Over here I have the left ventricle, I have the AV valve, I have the aortic semilunar valve. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the pressure volume curves. We're going to start this cycle right here, and we're going to show what's taking place. So right before this Q, the atria have contracted here. They've pushed blood from the left atrium into the left ventricle. And so then what's going to happen is that wave of depolarization is going to spread down the ventricular muscle mass. So here's that interventricular mass. It's going to spread down like this. And as it spreads down this way, I'm going to see this upward deflection. When it goes away this direction, I'm going to see this downward deflection. And then it's going to return to baseline during that phase 2 on your electrical event. So what I've got is I'm going to start it right here. So we've just pushed the atria have contracted. We've pushed the blood in here into the ventricle. Now the ventricle, the wave depolarization is going to spread through. It's going to start to contract. So as it contracts, it's going to come up like this. It's going to come over, and then it's going to drop down. Now, when the ventricles contract, they're going to start to generate force, and as they generate force, when it gets to about 10 millimeters of mercury right here, what's going to take place? That's enough pressure to close these AV valves. And so the AV valves will close at that point, and what you'll actually hear with the stethoscope is what's called S1. So S1 makes a sound as the AV valves close. And so that is your first heart sound, and that's also the closure of the AV valves. AV valves are going to close at that point. All right, now I'm going to continue to generate force. Now, I'm at 10 millimeters of mercury. Now, I can't open my aortic semilunar valve until I get to the diastolic pressure of 80 because I have to exceed the pressure in the aorta. So I'm going to continue 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. At 80, if I get just slightly above 80, I can now open the aortic semilunar valve. And so right here, what I'm going to do is I have exceeded the pressure in the aorta, and the semilunar valve is going to open. Okay, now if we drop down this way and then come up this way and come across from here to here, what's taking place is I'm contracting, but I'm not changing my volume. Because at this point, I've closed these valves, I haven't opened these valves, but contraction is taking place. So I have my end diastolic volume because the volume isn't changing. But also during this phase, I have what's called the isovolemic. Isovolemic just means same volume, but the heart's contracting. So I have my isovolemic contraction occurring during this phase. Now at this point, the pressure has exceeded the pressure in the aorta, so I'm going to pop open those semilunar valves. That shouldn't make a sound, okay? Now I'm going to continue the pressure, and I'm going to reach a peak pressure. So now AV valves are closed, semilunar valves are open. I'm going to continue to reach a peak pressure of 120, and then the pressure is going to start to drop. As the ventricles repolarize, then what happens is the pressure drops, and when the pressure becomes less in the ventricles than it is in the aorta, we're going to close that aortic semilunar valve. Now you notice here I opened at 80, but I don't have to get back to 80 to close it. I just have to get less than the pressure in the aorta. So right about here, I'm going to close the semilunar valve, and so I'm going to hear S2. So that's another sound. So I hear the lub here, the dub here. And so this is the semilunar valves are closing. And then I'm going to continue to drop on down this way. And as I drop on down this way, when I get to about 10 millimeters of mercury again, I'm actually going to pop open those AV valves again. So right about here, AV valves reopen. All right. Now, during this period, I'm coming down this way, coming up this way. If we look at what's taking place right here, the volume isn't changing. I close these, and these are closed, so I can't change my volume. So this is also isovolemic. And because it's isovolemic, because it's not changing, this is called relaxation. So again, I'm not changing the volume, so it's iso, same volume. Now, the other thing that's taking place is I have my end systolic volume in here. I can put my end systolic volume anytime between the closing of the semilunar valve and the opening of the AV valve because the volume doesn't change. So this tends to be about 60. All right. Over here, the EDV tends to be about 130. That means during this time, what I did is I changed the volume of blood. So during this time, what's happening is this: so if this line represents volume, there I'm at 130 right here. What's going to take place is I'm going to drop down like this, okay, and I'm going to have a stroke volume of about 70, and then I go into that in systolic volume of about 60. And then, of course, as soon as that aortic semilunar valve reopens, I'm going to start to fill back up again, okay, because blood's going to be coming in from the left atrium into the ventricle. Now, another thing that happens during this is when the pressure in the ventricles drop, the pressure in the aorta becomes greater. And so what happens is blood hits back against those aortic semilunar valves. And if I were measuring the pressure in the aorta would do this. It started at 80, and then it would follow this curve. So I have this pressure of 80 in the aorta. It follows the same curve here. It goes up to 120. It drops down. But then all of a sudden, the pressure in the aorta kicks up. And I get this little bump right here, and that's called the dicrotic notch or dicrotic wave. It's kind of like water hammer. If you're in an old house and the water's flowing and you turn off the faucet real quick, you hear that shaking of the pipes. This is a little bit similar because the blood hits these closed cuffs and it increases the pressure momentarily. All right, so this is what's happening on the EKG. Now, if we come over here and look at this, we can do the same events over here. So I have these different points. So let's start right here. Here's my end systolic volume. Here's an end systolic volume of 60. Now, so here's what's taking place. Is during this time period, I've just ended my T wave. So here's the end of my T wave. And at the end of my T wave, I'm going to come across like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my P wave, and then I'm going to get my QRS, and then T wave. Well, my end diastolic volume was measured here. Here it's measured right here also. Okay, because I had the atrial contraction, I added that last bit to it. So I'm going from 60 to 130. And so if you looked at atrial volume, it increased here, and then it increased here. In your notes, it talked about I got 80% of the return here, 20% here, because of that last atrial kick that was instituted by the P wave. All right, so what we have now is this is, again, ESV and EDV. But let's look at where some of this stuff is taking place. Now, look at this. I have this little flip right here. I've increased my volume because if this is my my volume's moving this way, and I'm going to move to this point right here to my EDV. But look what happens in my EDV. I get this little increase in pressure right here. And at the increase in pressure at 10 right here, I close the AV valve here. I'm also closing the AV valve here. And I'm hearing my S1, okay? Now as we come along this axis, look what's happening. The pressure's not changing. The volume's not changing. The volume is moving up this direction, but look what's happening to the pressure. The pressure's starting to increase. Since the volume's not changing, but the pressure is increasing, this is going to be my I'm going to rent a room, volemic contraction. All right? So there's my isovolemic contraction. Now as I move up this direction, I hit 80, and at 80, just like it happened over here, at 80, I open my semilunar valve. Same thing with here. I'm going to open my semilunar valve. Semilunar valve is going to open. All right? Now I'm going to move back this direction. As I move back this direction, I'm going from 80, here's 80, I'm coming up to 120 here, I'm going up to 120 here, right? And so I'm increasing the pressure, and then all of a sudden I drop that pressure back down, and at the point I drop the pressure back down and it becomes greater in the aorta than it does in the ventricles, I'm going to close that semilunar valve. So here is my S2, and that of course is the semilunar valve closes. All right? And then I'm going to drop along this axis. Now look what's taking place. I'm dropping the pressure, but the volume's not changing. And so this would be that isovolemic relaxation. all right, along this axis right here. And then, of course, it repeats itself. Now, when I look here, I've got some values represented. I have my ESV and I have my EDV, but where's my stroke volume? My stroke volume is from here to here. So there's my stroke volume. That's how much I push back. That's 70 from 130 to get back to 60. Now let's talk about changes in this. So the first thing we're going to look at is a change in mean arterial pressure. So there was an example in your notes about someone doing an isometric contraction. So if I'm looking at just the left ventricle and somebody does an isometric contraction or Valsuva's maneuver or bears down, what that's going to do is that's going to increase mean arterial pressure. So it's going to put more pressure back against this aortic semilunar valve. So let's say that I went and bared down. What's going to happen is it's going to change my diastolic pressure. So my diastolic, the opening pressure, goes up because I'm putting more pressure against that by bearing down. So let's say that it's 120 now over 90. That means that now I'm opening at 90 this valve. And so what's happening then is I'm spending more time moving this direction. If I spend more time moving this direction, I'm going to get less out. So here's what we can see is that if I open here, I don't start ejecting blood until here, and so my stroke volume is going to go down. All right, so now if we take that over, so stroke volume is going to go down, and of course if stroke volume goes down, what's going to happen to your ESV? Well, if stroke volume went from 70 to 60, then what's going to happen here is I'm going to get this, the ESV is going to go from 60 to 70 because there's that retained blood. Well, let's put it over here. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to now increase mean arterial pressure. We're going to bump it from 80 to 90, okay? So that means that my pressure is going to increase this direction. So none of this changes. My EDV didn't change. I just increased my mean arterial pressure. So I'm going to move more up this way until I get to 90. Now, here's what's taking place. Since I spent more time moving this direction, I have less time to move this direction. And it doesn't affect my systolic. So what you'll see with an increase in mean arterial pressure, what you'll see is I'll spend more time going this way, which means I have less time to go this direction, and I'm going to drop down here. Now, let's look and see what happened. My stroke volume before was 70, but now here it might only be 60, which takes me to an end systolic volume of 70. So I've got less blood was able to get out because I increased that mean arterial pressure. Well, let's change it up a little bit because we also talked about what would happen if we increase venous return. So if we increase venous return, what we're going to do is we're going to mark it this direction. So let's say I went from 130 to 140. All right, I'm going to get rid of this stuff for right now, and we're going to show you what that happens with that increased venous return. So now I'm going to move out this direction, and as I move out this direction, I'm going to have my electrical event. It's going to kick in, and so same thing. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to close that AV valve at 10. I move up this direction. Now we just changed EDV. We didn't change blood pressure. So I just increased the venous return, but I didn't change my blood pressure yet. So I'm going to come up like this. It didn't affect the diastolic opening pressure. I'm going to open at 80, but now what's going to take place is we're going to kick in Frank-Starling's law. Because Frank-Starling's law tells me this, that if let's see, I've got to draw that above where you can see it. So with Frank-Starling's law, okay, so here's Frank-Starling's law says this, so here's my end diastolic volumes, okay? And then here is my stroke volumes. So if I was at 70 here, I would come across, if I'm at 130 here, I would come across like this and be at a stroke volume of 70. Okay, so 130 would give me 70. But if my end diastolic volume increased, Frank-Starling's law says that for every increase over and above the normal, I'm going to have a stronger contraction. So if it went to 140, I might have come up and across like this and have a stroke volume of 80. So I generated a stronger contraction. So we're going to open here at 80, but now we're going to have a stronger contraction, and it comes up like this, and so my systolic blood pressure went up because the heart generated more force. But look what else Frank-Starling's law tells me. It says I'm going to push out everything over and above what was put in, Okay, so it returns me back to normal. So I ended up with a stroke volume of maybe of 80. So I went from 140 to 80, but look here, I'm back to 60. So I come back and I'm at a in-systolic volume of 60. All right, so I hope that helps you out with events of the cardiac cycle and then also the changes in the pressure volume curve. Actually, let me give you just one more. So the last one is what happens with increased contractility. Because with an increase in contractility, here's what's taking place. I'm going to release norepinephrine onto the myocytes. So here's these contractile myocytes. So contractility refers to this. I'm going to have at the same EDV, so my EDV might be 130, but I'm going to have a higher stroke volume. The reason for that is norepinephrine plugs into beta-1 receptors. It activates a GS protein. It phosphorylates, it activates adenylate cyclase, increases cyclic AMP, activates protein kinase. Protein kinase is going to phosphorylate the opening of more L-type calcium channels. That's going to allow more calcium to come into the cell, activate more RYR2 receptors, release more calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. That's going to allow more calcium to go in and bind troponin, and then that's going to cause a stronger contraction. So contractility, I'm going to start at the same EDV, 130 here, but I'm going to hit it with norepinephrine or epinephrine, and what I'm going to see is I'm going to see this event. I'm going to see a stronger contraction, and it's going to bring me up and over and then down. So now what happened is I got out a higher stroke volume, and I have less in-systolic volume. So I started with 130. Let's say my stroke volume was normally 70. This went to 80. That leaves me with an ESV of 50. And that's the principle of contractility. All right, hope that